Moira adjusted the strap of her overstuffed tote bag, shifting Tessa's weight on her hip as she hurried down the damp city sidewalk. A grocery receipt fluttered out of her pocket, caught by the wind, but she let it go. The loss of 50 cents off frozen peas wasn't the biggest disaster in her life. Tess yawned against her shoulder, her tiny fingers tangled in Moira's scarf, and for a moment, the exhaustion in her little body mirrored her own. The subway entrance loomed ahead, the grimy metal rails slick from the drizzle, and Moira quickened her pace. Her shift at the cafe had run late, and now she had exactly 14 minutes to drop Tess at Mrs. Callahan's before sprinting to her next gig, a last-minute modeling job that paid in cash. It wasn't glamorous. It was barely even work. Stand still, look vaguely pretty, let someone drape an overpriced dress over you for a catalog no one read. But it covered an electric bill or a week's worth of groceries, and at this point, dignity had long been a luxury she couldn't afford. By the time she reached Mrs. Callahan's apartment, her sweater was sticking to her back, and Tess had begun the slow descent into a meltdown. "Mommy will be back soon, baby," she murmured, pressing a kiss to her daughter's soft cheek, even as Tess clung tighter. Mrs. Callahan, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, took Tess with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times before. "She's been good today?" Moira asked, shifting from foot to foot as she checked her phone. 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. "She's always an angel," Mrs. Callahan assured her, bouncing Tess gently. "Go, before you're late." Moira gave a grateful nod and bolted. The subway platform smelled like burnt metal and old newspapers, and when the train screeched to a stop, she slipped into a seat by the window, pressing her forehead to the cool glass. A familiar exhaustion crept into her bones, the kind that never quite left, the kind that came from stringing together 4 different jobs and still feeling like she was always $20 short of survival. Modeling gigs like today's were rare, but she had learned to take them when they came. When she arrived at the studio, a man with an earpiece barely glanced at her before waving her inside. The space smelled of hairspray and coffee, the controlled chaos of assistants, stylists, and photographers moving around like a well-oiled machine. Moira found her spot under the bright lights, where a makeup artist dusted something shimmery across her cheekbones while a stylist zipped her into a dress so delicate it felt like a crime to wear. Just another job. Another paycheck. Nothing more. After an hour of standing still and nodding at directions, turn your chin a little, good, now soften your eyes, relax your shoulders, Moira was already half planning her evening. Pick up Tess, find something cheap for dinner, check the temp agency's postings to see if anything paid better than working 3 jobs at once. Then, as she stepped off the set, someone was waiting for her. Camille Waverly didn't belong in a place like this. The studio was filled with overworked assistants and tired models in borrowed clothes, but she stood apart, polished and poised, her tailored coat falling perfectly over her frame. She was old money wealth, the kind that didn't flaunt itself with gold chains or designer logos because it didn't have to. "Moira Langleet?" Camille's voice was crisp but not unkind. Moira hesitated, glancing around. People were still moving past them, but Camille's presence had cut through the noise. "Yes? I need to speak with you. Somewhere private." Moira's first instinct was to say no. She had a talent for spotting trouble, and rich women looking for favors rarely had anything good to offer. But Camille's expression was steady, expectant, as if she already knew Moira would agree. And, against her better judgment, she did. They ended up in a small cafe 2 blocks away, the kind with pressed white napkins and waiters who refilled water glasses before they were even half empty. Moira sat stiffly across from Camille, resisting the urge to check her phone for the time. "You resemble someone," Camille said, getting straight to the point. Moira arched an eyebrow. "I get that a lot. Models tend to look like other models." Camille gave a small, knowing smile. "Not just any someone. Vanessa Prescott." The name sent a jolt through Moira, though she kept her face impassive. Even if you didn't follow the lives of the country's wealthiest families, you knew about Vanessa Prescott. Heiress. Socialite. Disappeared without a trace years ago. Can't say I see it, Moira said, though she had, once or twice, caught a passing resemblance in photographs. Same high cheekbones. Same sharp nose. But plenty of people looked alike. Camille reached into her bag, pulled out a photo, and slid it across the table. Moira barely glanced at it before looking away. I have an opportunity for you, Camille continued. A job. Moira let out a dry laugh. I already have 4. This one pays more. That got her attention. Doing what? Camille folded her hands neatly on the table. Impersonating Vanessa. Just for one night. Moira blinked. Excuse me? Camille didn't blink. There's a gala this weekend. An important one. Vanessa was supposed to inherit the Prescott estate, but she disappeared before she could claim what was rightfully hers. Her stepmother, Mariska, controls everything now. No one has challenged her. Moira frowned. And you want me to, what? Walk in, pretend to be her, and demand my birthright? I want you to attend. Be seen. Nothing more. This is insane. It's $200,000. Moira's heart stopped. That's the payment, Camille said simply, taking a sip of her coffee. Half before, half after. Moira couldn't breathe. That kind of money didn't just change lives, it saved them. She could leave behind the temp jobs, the exhausting shifts, the constant fear of eviction. She could give Tess a home that didn't come with a leaky ceiling and a landlord who forgot to fix things. And yet, her gut twisted. This is a lie, she said carefully. It's fraud. Camille leaned forward slightly, her expression calm. No one's expecting legal proof of identity at a gala. It's an event, not a courtroom. All you have to do is be present. Look like her. Let Mariska see you. And then what? Camille hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then we see what Mariska does. Moira exhaled slowly. Every alarm bell in her brain was ringing, but the weight of Tessa's future pressed down on her harder. She reached for her water glass, gripping it tight. I need to think about it. Camille nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. But not for long. She placed a business card on the table and stood. The gala is in 3 days. As Camille walked away, Moira stared at the card. Her reflection in the water glass distorted and unfamiliar. $200,000. She closed her eyes. And thought about everything she could do with it. Moira sat in the chair as the stylist pinned the last section of her hair, twisting it into the sleek, effortless waves that had once been Vanessa Prescott's signature. The color had been adjusted, her deep brown hair lightened to the exact shade of honeyed gold that Vanessa had worn in the last photographs before she vanished. A few inches had been trimmed to match, layers falling just right around her face. The makeup artist had worked meticulously, contouring her cheekbones, subtly reshaping her brows, adjusting the softness of her lips. Camille watched from across the room, arms folded, the quiet overseer of Moira's transformation. She had arranged for everything, the gown, the jewelry, the styling, even the meticulous selection of the right perfume. Diarissimo, Camille had said, handing over the small crystal bottle. It was her favorite. Moira had never worn perfume that cost more than a cup of coffee, let alone something that smelled like old money and carefully guarded secrets. She dabbed it behind her ears, her pulse quickening as the scent wrapped around her. The gown was a masterpiece, custom-made in the same icy blue shade that Vanessa had worn to her last public event. It clung in all the right places, the fabric whispering against her skin as she moved. The diamond bracelet on her wrist, borrowed from Camille's private collection, caught the light, winking at her like it was in on the joke. The mirror reflected someone familiar, yet entirely foreign. Moira inhaled slowly, pressing her palms against the vanity table to steady herself. This is insane. Camille stepped closer, her eyes scanning Moira with an appraising sharpness. No, she said. This is necessary. The car pulled up to the entrance of the Prescott Foundation's annual gala, the kind of event where the wealthy gathered to congratulate themselves over champagne and silent auctions. The doors opened, and the air outside was thick with the sound of cameras clicking, guests murmuring, the occasional pop of a cork. Moira stepped out carefully, her heels touching the pavement with the certainty of someone who belonged. At least, that was the illusion she had to sell. The golden light from the chandeliers inside spilled onto the marble steps, where familiar faces of high society moved like figures in an expensive painting. The moment she entered, heads turned. She didn't need to look at Camille to know she was watching, assessing every reaction, searching for cracks in Mariska Prescott's perfectly curated world. Moira lifted her chin, letting the trained poise take over, the way she had been coached. Vanessa had once known this world intimately. Moira had only stepped into it for an evening. Grant Whitaker saw her before she saw him. The moment their eyes met, everything around them seemed to still. His face drained of color so fast that for a second, she thought he might actually pass out. The glass in his hand trembled slightly, a ripple disturbing the deep amber of his whiskey. His lips parted, his throat working as if he were trying to form words, but none came. Moira's own heartbeat faltered. There had been many possible reactions Camille had predicted: suspicion, anger, denial, but not this. Grant looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. His fingers tightened around the glass, his knuckles white, and then, barely above a whisper, the words left his lips. I thought you were dead. A rush of unease climbed up Moira's spine, but she didn't break. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words, as if she had expected them. Grant took a slow step toward her, then another, the space between them closing as if drawn by some invisible force. His eyes darted across her face, searching, cataloging every detail. Moira could feel the weight of his grief, thick and suffocating, pressing against her like hands trying to pull her under. He whispered again, barely audible this time, almost to himself. Vanessa. A hand gripped his arm. Mariska had arrived. She stood poised, wrapped in the kind of elegance that came not from youth but from calculated experience. Her black gown was simple but deliberate, the diamonds at her ears an understated power move. She held her glass lightly, as if completely unbothered by the fact that a dead girl had seemingly walked back into her gala. But Moira saw it. The fraction of a second where Mariska's fingers clenched just a little too hard around the delicate stem of her champagne flute. That was the tell. Mariska recovered smoothly, offering a small, polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. Grant, she said in that perfectly measured tone of hers. You're making a scene. Grant barely registered her voice. He was still staring at Moira, still trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Mariska turned her gaze to Moira, assessing her in a way that felt almost clinical. What an entrance. Camille, standing just beyond them, gave Moira the most imperceptible of nods. The plan was working. Moira forced a soft smile, just enough mystery behind it, just enough hesitation. It's been a long time, she said, her voice careful, measured. Mariska's lips curved slightly, but there was nothing warm about it. Indeed, she said. You must have a lot of stories to tell. Camille stepped forward then, effortlessly slipping into the conversation. Perhaps this isn't the place, she suggested. After all, tonight is about the foundation, isn't it? Mariska's gaze flicked to Camille, the faintest flicker of annoyance crossing her features before it smoothed away. Of course, she said. We should celebrate. The unspoken message was clear. Not here. Not now. But later. Moira felt the shift in the air. Mariska wasn't questioning if this was Vanessa. She was already planning what to do next. Grant reached for her then, his fingers brushing against her wrist, hesitant but desperate. "We need to talk," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Moira hesitated. Camille had warned her that Grant would be unpredictable, but she hadn't prepared her for the weight of this moment, the raw, unfiltered emotion in his voice, the way he seemed to be unraveling in real time. She let him guide her away from the main room, down the hall where the noise of the gala dimmed. He turned to her, his eyes wild with disbelief. "Where have you been?" His voice was tight, barely held together. "Why didn't you come back?" Moira felt the world closing in. She had trained for this, prepared for the questions, but nothing had prepared her for Grant, for the way his grief clung to him like a second skin. She softened her expression just enough. "I don't remember everything," she said, voice laced with hesitation, as if it physically pained her to admit it. Grant exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. "You don't remember?" His voice cracked. "That's all you have to say?" Moira held his gaze, let the silence stretch just long enough. "I remember enough." The words were vague, deliberately placed, just enough to keep him chasing the answer. Grant swallowed hard, looking at her like he wanted to believe, like he needed to. Camille appeared at the end of the hall, and Moira met her gaze. The plan was working. Mariska was hiding something. And Grant was falling apart. Mariska Prescott glided across the ballroom with the deliberate ease of someone who had been born to own any room she entered. She wasn't in a hurry, nor did she appear shaken, but there was something razor-sharp behind her gaze, something assessing, something that sent a prickle down Moira's spine. Moira forced herself to stay still, to exude the same cool poise that Camille had drilled into her. Her hand rested lightly on the stem of her champagne glass, the diamonds at her wrist catching the golden light. Every detail had been curated for this moment, the hair, the dress, the scent, even the way she tilted her chin, just so, like she knew she belonged here. Mariska stopped beside her, holding her own glass with the effortless elegance of a woman who had spent her life making others feel just a little less than. She smiled, the expression perfectly polite, but her eyes told a different story. "Well," Mariska said, her voice smooth as silk. "I have to say, you've surprised me." Moira returned the smile, keeping it soft, uncertain. "I imagine I've surprised everyone." Mariska hummed, swirling the champagne in her glass, eyes never leaving Moira's face. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" she said, watching carefully, as though the right, or wrong, response would tell her everything she needed to know. Moira's heart pounded in her chest. The key, Camille had said, was to give away nothing. To let Mariska draw her own conclusions. To make her wonder. She exhaled slowly. "Yes," she said at last, the weight of the word carrying more than one meaning. Mariska took a sip of her champagne, her lashes lowering just slightly. "And yet, you look exactly the same." A test. A trap. Moira tilted her head, let her fingers brush the side of her flute as if grounding herself. "Do I?" she asked lightly. "Maybe it's just good lighting." Mariska's smile didn't falter, but Moira saw the way her grip tightened ever so slightly on the glass. She turned her body slightly, angling them away from the guests still pretending not to listen. "Tell me," Mariska continued, her voice warm but her words anything but. "Where have you been?" Before Moira could answer, before she could come up with something clever, something vague, she felt Grant step in beside her. His presence filled the space between them, electric and demanding. "Where have you been?" he echoed, but there was no polite detachment in his voice. His was raw, urgent, clawing for something real. Moira took a slow breath. She had to be careful. Too much detail and she'd contradict herself later. Too little, and they'd doubt her altogether. I don't remember everything, she said, glancing at Grant, then back at Mariska, measuring their reactions. It's hazy. Grant let out a bitter laugh. Hazy, he repeated. That's what you have to say? Mariska lifted a single brow, studying Moira as if she were an insect under glass. That's convenient, she murmured. Moira swallowed hard. She had expected disbelief, had braced for it, but being trapped between Grant's raw grief and Mariska's unshaken scrutiny made her stomach turn. Camille had warned her about this. Grant would be emotional, erratic, but Mariska would be something worse. She would be calculated. She would wait, and she would watch, and she would never act until she was certain she couldn't lose. Moira forced herself to keep her shoulders relaxed, to take a careful sip of champagne. It wasn't convenient, she said finally. It was terrifying. Grant flinched, as if the words had reached something deep inside him. His fingers twitched at his side, and for the first time since the gala began, something shifted in his expression. Mariska, however, only smiled. I can imagine, she said, setting her glass down on the nearest table. It must be difficult, returning to all of this. Moira nodded slightly, allowing just a hint of hesitation to flicker across her face. Mariska's gaze sharpened. You must come home. The words were like a thread pulled too tight, the air around them stretching thin. Moira's pulse stuttered. This was it. You belong at the estate, Mariska continued, her voice full of warmth, of kindness, but her eyes were watching, waiting for a reaction. We'll have so much to talk about. Camille had warned her this might happen, had told her to expect it. But the reality of it still made her throat dry. Grant stepped in again, his voice quieter now. Yes, he said. Come home. For a second, Moira thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, hope, maybe, or something even more dangerous. Mariska reached out, fingers light against Moira's wrist. It's time, she said. Don't you agree? Moira knew she should hesitate. Knew that too quick of an answer would make her look suspicious. But she also knew that if she declined, it would all fall apart. She inhaled, let her shoulders drop just slightly, like someone finally surrendering to the inevitable. Yes, she murmured. I suppose it is. Mariska's nails pressed lightly against her skin, a fleeting touch, barely there. Good girl. Moira felt something twist inside her. Across the room, Camille lifted her glass, the signal they had agreed upon. The plan was working. Grant took a step back, exhaling slowly, his hand running through his hair. He looked at her like he was still trying to piece her together, like he wanted to hold on but wasn't sure what he was holding on to. Mariska, on the other hand, had already turned away, already moving back into the crowd, her mind working, wheels turning behind her calm expression. Moira had agreed to go to the estate. Now, Mariska would make her move. Moira found Camille by the bar, the older woman swirling the dark amber liquid in her glass. You did well, Camille murmured as Moira sat beside her. Moira exhaled shakily. I feel sick. Camille turned slightly, studying her. That means it's working. Moira pressed her fingers to her temples. I need out, she whispered. I need to leave before this goes any further. Camille was silent for a long moment. Then, softly, she invited you in. Moira's chest tightened. Camille set her glass down. That means she isn't sure yet. But she will be soon. Moira closed her eyes for half a second, the weight of the night pressing against her ribcage. This is too much. Camille placed a hand on hers, light, firm. You just have to hold on a little longer. Moira shook her head, but Camille only held tighter. Not yet, she said. Not until Mariska makes a mistake. Moira swallowed the panic rising in her throat. She had stepped into this willingly. But now she wasn't sure she would ever find a way out. The hotel suite was something out of a dream. The kind of place where champagne sat waiting in a bucket of ice, where thick white robes hung on hooks beside a bathroom bigger than Moira's entire apartment. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, lights glittering against the dark. Moira ran her fingers along the marble counter, a nervous energy thrumming beneath her skin. This wasn't her life. It wasn't even close. But for tonight, it was the role she had agreed to play. She kicked off her shoes, her toes sinking into the plush carpet, and poured herself a glass of water from the crystal decanter. Camille had insisted she stay here rather than return to her normal life, just in case Mariska decided to test her commitment. It made sense. But now, alone in the quiet, Moira felt exposed. Her phone buzzed. A message from Camille. "Stay put. We'll talk in the morning." She exhaled slowly, setting the phone aside. One more night. One more piece of the illusion. A knock at the door startled her. It was late. Too late for anything casual. Her heart picked up speed as she padded across the suite, hesitating just long enough to feel the weight of the decision before unlocking it. Grant stood in the hallway. He wasn't polished like he had been at the gala. His tie was loosened, his jacket missing. His normally perfect hair was slightly mussed, and the smell of expensive scotch clung to him, subtle but unmistakable. For a second, neither of them spoke. His eyes scanned her face, his expression raw, unguarded. "I knew you wouldn't sleep," he murmured. Moira gripped the door handle tighter. "Grant. I just need a minute." She should have told him no. Should have shut the door, sent him away. But hesitation flickered in her chest, something she couldn't quite name. She stepped aside. Grant walked in, his presence filling the space, bringing a weight with him that hadn't been there before. He turned toward her, his gaze drinking her in, like he was still trying to decide whether or not she was real. "I shouldn't be here," he said, almost to himself. Moira crossed her arms, keeping the counter between them. "Then why are you?" He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Because I saw you tonight, and nothing makes sense anymore." A beat of silence stretched between them, charged and unsteady. Then, before she could process it, before she could move, he closed the distance. His hands cupped her face, his lips crashing into hers, urgent and desperate. The kiss wasn't gentle. It wasn't the kind that waited for permission or left room for hesitation. It was forceful, weighted with too many emotions, grief, anger, longing. Moira's body went rigid, her mind catching up seconds after her hands instinctively pushed against his chest. She stepped back, breath unsteady. Grant's face was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or something darker. "I lost you," he whispered. His voice cracked, raw in a way that made Moira's stomach twist. "I can't lose you again." She swallowed hard. "Grant, I never wanted to let you go." His voice dropped lower, thick with something she couldn't quite place. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I was too controlling," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if he had been holding them in for years. "Too jealous. I thought if I could just keep you close, if I could." He stopped himself, shaking his head. "I drove you away, didn't I?" Moira's pulse pounded in her ears. This wasn't part of the script. Camille had warned her that Grant would be emotional, but she hadn't prepared for this. A chilling thought crept into her mind. Had he driven Vanessa away? Had he done something worse? Grant turned back to her, his expression open, vulnerable. "Tell me. Before everything, before you left. Was I the reason?" Moira stared at him, the weight of the question pressing down on her. She wasn't Vanessa. She didn't know the truth. But standing in front of him, feeling the heaviness in his words, the desperate way he was searching for absolution, she couldn't help but wonder. She forced herself to stay calm. "No," she said softly. "It wasn't just you." His shoulders sagged slightly, as if that was the answer he had been hoping for. She needed to get him out. She stepped forward, placing a careful hand on his arm. "Grant, it's late. We can talk about this later." He exhaled, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "Yeah." He nodded, more to himself than to her. "Yeah, okay." She walked him to the door, her fingers resting lightly on his sleeve as if guiding him, as if she wasn't fighting the unease curling in her stomach. When he stepped into the hall, he turned back one last time. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "I don't want to lose you again." Moira didn't answer. She only watched as he walked away, his figure disappearing down the dimly lit corridor. The second the door clicked shut, she locked it. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her face, sucking in a sharp breath. Camille had to know about this. She grabbed her phone, fingers unsteady as she typed. "Grant came to my room. He's unraveling. I want out." The reply came quicker than she expected. "Not yet. You're too close. Just a little longer." Moira clenched her jaw, staring at the screen. She should have known Camille wouldn't let her walk away so easily. The money was too good. The plan was too carefully laid out. And Mariska hadn't made her move yet. Her phone buzzed again. "I'll double your payment." She squeezed her eyes shut. It would be enough. More than enough. One more night. Just a little longer. Camille perched on the edge of the sofa, stirring her coffee with slow, deliberate movements. Across from her, Moira sat rigid in an oversized chair that probably cost more than her entire apartment, her stomach twisting as she replayed the night before. The kiss. The confession. The way Grant had looked at her, searching for something that wasn't there. "You're lucky he was drunk," Camille said finally, setting her spoon down with a quiet clink. "He'll question himself in the morning, wonder if he imagined things. But that won't last." Moira exhaled sharply. "I want out." "You always want out," Camille murmured, lifting her cup to her lips. "I'm serious." Camille arched a brow. "And I'm serious about finishing what we started." Moira clenched her jaw, staring out the hotel window, watching the city hum below them. She didn't belong in this world. The money was supposed to make it worth it, but after last night, after the way Grant's grip had lingered just a little too long, she wasn't so sure. Camille sighed, setting her coffee aside. "Moira, we are close. If Mariska believes you're Vanessa, if she thinks you're really here to take what's hers, she'll slip. She always does. And if she doesn't?" Camille's lips curled slightly. "She will." Moira dragged a hand down her face. "And what if Grant?" "Grant is a distraction," Camille cut in smoothly. "Forget Grant." Easy for her to say. Camille leaned forward, her expression shifting into something sharper. "We set the trap now. 2 conversations. One with Mariska. One with Grant. We ask the right questions. We record everything." Moira rubbed her temple, feeling the weight of it settle in her chest. "What do I say to Mariska?" Camille reached for her phone, swiping through her notes. "Simple. You call her. You say, 'Now that I'm back, we need to discuss my inheritance.'" Moira's stomach twisted. "That's it?" Camille nodded. "That's it. If she's guilty, if she's been sitting comfortably on Vanessa's fortune for all these years, she'll react. She'll try to play it cool, but she'll feel the ground shift beneath her. Moira swallowed hard, staring at the phone as Camille slid it across the table. Call her. Her fingers hesitated over the screen before she tapped the number Camille had already saved. The line rang twice before a voice, smooth as glass, answered. Mariska Prescott. Moira's breath hitched. She forced herself to stay steady. Mariska, she said, carefully mirroring Vanessa's cadence. Now that I'm back, we need to discuss my inheritance. There was silence. It stretched just long enough to make Moira's palms damp, just long enough for doubt to creep in. Then Mariska spoke. My dear, she said, voice syrupy sweet, what a surprise. Moira gripped the phone tighter. Mariska's tone didn't waver, but there was something there, something brittle beneath the surface. Of course, we can discuss that, she continued. Why don't you come by the estate tomorrow? Camille gave Moira a quick thumbs up. Moira forced a smile into her voice. That sounds perfect. Wonderful, Mariska purred. We have so much to catch up on. The call ended, and Moira let out a shaky breath. Camille smirked. See? Easy. Moira rubbed her hands over her face. Yeah. Easy. Mariska didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for proof. She believed it. The Prescott estate was just as cold as Moira expected. The walls were lined with art she would never understand, chandeliers dripping in crystals that cast fractured light across the marble floors. It was beautiful in the way that museums were beautiful, grand and perfect and completely lifeless. Mariska greeted her in the sunroom, the vast windows framing the gardens, her expression perfectly composed. Vanessa, she murmured, pressing a cool kiss to Moira's cheek. Moira forced herself not to flinch. Mariska gestured to the seating area, where a tea set was already arranged, delicate porcelain cups with matching saucers, small silver spoons resting beside them. Moira sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, her pulse a steady drum against her ribs. Mariska poured the tea, moving with the kind of elegance that came from decades of practice. You must be overwhelmed, she said, handing Moira a cup. It must feel like stepping into a dream. Moira took a careful sip, the heat burning her tongue. I suppose it does, she said lightly. Mariska's lips curved faintly. Of course, you'll want to get things in order now that you're back. Moira tilted her head. Things? Mariska waved a hand. Legal matters. Accounts. Your trust, of course. The words were warm, but her grip on the saucer was just a little too tight. Camille had been right. Mariska wasn't questioning whether Moira was Vanessa. She was already figuring out how to keep her under control. Moira set her cup down. It's strange, she mused. Thinking of all that money sitting untouched. Mariska laughed, a rich, melodic sound. Nothing has been untouched, darling. Moira felt the hairs on her arms rise. Mariska reached across the table, her fingers light over Moira's wrist. Of course, Vanessa has every right to her inheritance. Moira forced herself to smile. Mariska smiled back. But it didn't reach her eyes. By the time Moira returned to the hotel, her head was spinning. Camille was waiting in the suite, pouring herself a drink at the minibar. Well? Moira sank into the couch. She's not worried about proving who I am. Camille smirked. Because she already knows. Moira ran a hand through her hair, frustration bubbling in her chest. What if she's not guilty? Camille handed her a glass of something amber-colored. She's guilty. Moira wanted to believe her. She wanted to be sure. That night, as she undressed, something crinkled inside her purse. She reached in, fingers brushing against a small folded note. Her breath caught. She opened it, the words scrawled in careful, deliberate strokes. I know you are not her. We need to talk. Moira's stomach dropped. Someone new. The cafe smelled like burnt espresso and old leather, the kind of place that had been elegant once but had settled into a state of comfortable neglect. Moira sat in the corner, fingers curled around a ceramic cup she had no intention of drinking from. Across from her, Camille stirred her tea without drinking it either. They were both waiting. The door chimed, and a woman stepped in, scanning the room with careful precision. She was older, in her 60s maybe, with silver hair pulled into a low bun and a practical navy coat buttoned up to her throat. Her eyes, sharp and weary, landed on Moira, and something flickered across her face, recognition, and then something else. Sylvia. She moved toward the table, her footsteps quiet, and slid into the seat across from Moira with the precision of someone who had spent decades blending into the background. You got my note, she said, her voice steady but hushed. Moira nodded. You're the one who put it in my purse? Sylvia exhaled slowly. I had to be sure. Moira exchanged a quick glance with Camille, who was watching Sylvia with a careful patience, waiting. Sure of what? Moira asked. Sylvia hesitated. That you weren't her. Something about the certainty in her voice sent a chill up Moira's spine. You knew Vanessa well? Sylvia's lips pressed together, a lifetime of discretion battling with the weight of what she had come to say. I raised her, she admitted. Not officially, of course. But her mother was gone, and Mariska, her mouth tightened. Mariska was never maternal. Moira leaned in. Why did you think I wasn't her? Sylvia studied her for a long moment before shaking her head. Vanessa had a scar, she said simply. On her left wrist. From falling off a horse when she was 10. Moira's stomach tightened. She had memorized details of Vanessa's life, had practiced answering questions about her childhood, but this she had no way to fake. Camille didn't react, didn't move, but Moira could feel the tension crackling between them. She was my girl, Sylvia said softly. And I knew, the moment I saw you, that you weren't her. Moira swallowed. Then why are you here? Sylvia reached into her coat, pulling out a small leather-bound book, its edges worn, the binding cracked from years of being handled. She set it on the table between them, her fingers lingering over it like it was something fragile, something alive. Moira stared at it. Vanessa's diary, Sylvia said. I found it after she disappeared. I should have come forward then, but, she shook her head. It wouldn't have mattered. Mariska had already taken control. Moira reached out hesitantly, running her fingers over the cover before opening it. The pages were filled with Vanessa's looping handwriting, pressed hard into the paper, as if she had been writing with urgency. She skimmed the words, her pulse quickening. Mariska wants the inheritance for herself. She must act before I get married. I know she will never let me be free. Moira's breath caught in her throat. She turned the page, and there it was again, underlined twice. I know she will never let me be free. Camille, for the first time since the meeting had begun, reached for the diary, flipping through the pages with quick, efficient movements. She had been right about Mariska. But now they had something more than suspicion. Moira looked up at Sylvia. Why now? Why give this to me? Sylvia's expression was unreadable. Because she believes you're Vanessa, she said quietly. And if Mariska thinks she didn't finish what she started, she'll panic. Moira gripped the diary tighter. Camille finally looked up, her expression unreadable. You've just handed us everything we need. Sylvia nodded. Then use it before it's too late. Moira sat in the dimly lit lounge of the hotel bar, fingers curled around the stem of a half-empty glass of wine. Across from her, Grant was unraveling. He wasn't drunk this time, though the whiskey in his hand suggested he wished he were. No, this was something else. His leg bounced under the table, his jaw tight, his gaze flickering between her face and the rim of his glass. She pressed the small recorder in her purse, ensuring it was on. Camille's voice echoed in her head, "Get him to talk. Get him to admit what he did. Or what he knows." Grant let out a sharp breath, setting his drink down with more force than necessary. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice rough, urgent. "I barely slept. You come back after all this time and expect me to act like it's normal? Like I can just," he exhaled harshly, shaking his head. "I need to know why." Moira forced herself to meet his gaze, ignoring the unease tightening in her stomach. "Why what?" His fingers curled into fists. "Why you left. Why you disappeared. Why you didn't come back for me." She had practiced the script. Had rehearsed the vague, carefully crafted responses Camille had helped her perfect. But Grant wasn't following the script. He was pulling her into something raw and messy, something she wasn't prepared for. She swallowed, keeping her voice steady. "I told you, I don't remember everything." Grant's expression twisted. "That's bullshit." She tensed, but he leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I knew you," he whispered. "I knew every inch of you. I knew how you thought, how you moved, how you breathed. You don't just disappear like that. Not unless someone made you." Moira's pulse jumped. His hand twitched, like he wanted to reach for her but didn't trust himself to. "Did she do something to you?" His voice was softer now, edged with something like fear. "Did Mariska?" Moira didn't answer. Grant sat back, shaking his head. "I should have protected you. I should have. She couldn't do this. Not like this." She felt it building in her chest, a pressure too heavy, too sharp. The guilt, the exhaustion, the way he was looking at her like she was something fragile and breakable and his. She couldn't take it anymore. She set her glass down and exhaled. "I'm not her." Grant stilled. Moira swallowed hard. "I'm not Vanessa." The words landed between them, heavy and irrevocable. For a long, painful moment, Grant didn't react. Didn't move. Didn't even blink. Then, slowly, his expression darkened. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood, looming over her. His hands trembled at his sides, fists clenching and unclenching, like he didn't know what to do with them. "You're lying," he said, his voice eerily calm. Moira lifted her chin, ignoring the tremor in her fingers. "No, I'm not." Grant let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You think this is a game? You think you can just," his breath hitched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Who put you up to this?" Moira didn't answer. He stared at her, something wounded and furious in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The moment he was gone, Moira grabbed her purse, her fingers shaking as she shut off the recorder. It was over. Grant was going to tell someone. And there was nothing she could do to stop him. Grant had never been a man who sat with his anger. He needed to act, to do something, to reclaim a sense of control. So, the next evening, dressed in a tailored suit that fit him like armor, he arrived at the Prescott charity auction, a social event he normally would have skipped. But he knew Mariska would be there. And he needed answers. The room was filled with polished people holding champagne flutes and bidding on things they didn't need, their laughter light and easy. But Grant wasn't here to bid. Mariska stood near the stage, speaking to a group of donors, her smile poised, her posture perfect. She turned slightly at the sound of his approach, her expression flickering with mild surprise. "Grant," she said smoothly. "What a pleasant surprise." He didn't waste time. Did you know there's an imposter running around pretending to be Vanessa? Mariska barely reacted. Grant watched her closely, waiting for the mask to slip, for the carefully crafted exterior to crack. But she only gave him a slow, assessing look, then took a sip of her champagne. I suppose it was only a matter of time before someone tried. Grant's jaw tightened. That's all you have to say? Mariska tilted her head, her smile just a little too sharp. What would you like me to say? Grant clenched his teeth. She fooled me. Mariska's lips twitched, just barely. Well, that is surprising. Grant bristled. Mariska glanced at her watch. If you're looking for an apology, I'm afraid I don't have one. If you were careless enough to let someone deceive you, that's hardly my concern. Grant exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. You don't even want to know who she is? Mariska lifted a single brow. Does it matter? Grant stared at her. She was lying. She cared. And that was all he needed to know. Across the room, near the silent auction table, Camille watched. She hadn't planned to attend the event, but something in her gut had told her she needed to. And now, standing just close enough to overhear, she realized she'd been right. Grant was talking. And Mariska was listening. Moira was in danger. Moira had barely stepped into her hotel room when the knock came. Not a polite, tentative tap, but an urgent, deliberate pounding. The kind that made her stomach drop before she even reached the door. She didn't have to open it to know who was on the other side. Mariska Prescott. Moira inhaled, forcing a steady breath. She had prepared for this moment, or at least Camille had. But knowing it was coming didn't make it any less terrifying. She turned the lock, smoothing her expression into something neutral, something just shy of surprised, before pulling the door open. Mariska stood there, flanked by two of her ever-efficient assistants, both of whom lingered just enough to be intimidating but not enough to draw attention. Mariska herself was impeccably composed, as always, but her eyes, cold, sharp, gave her away. You've had your fun, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Now it's over. Moira shut the door behind her, turning slowly. I don't know what you mean. Mariska's smile was brittle. Oh, don't be coy. It's exhausting. She tilted her head slightly, assessing Moira like she was something under a microscope. Who sent you? Was it one of my husband's old friends? Some disgruntled former employee with an overactive imagination? Moira didn't answer. Mariska took another step forward, eyes narrowing. Or was it Grant? Moira stayed perfectly still. Mariska let out a humorless laugh. Of course. Grant. He always did like his little games. She crossed her arms, the amusement draining from her voice. But you've taken this one too far. Moira forced herself to meet her gaze. I haven't taken anything. Mariska's expression sharpened. You're trying to steal from me. Moira blinked. I'm trying to reclaim what's mine. Mariska scoffed. You really are committed to this performance, aren't you? Moira shrugged, keeping her voice level. I'm only taking back what was supposed to be mine all along. Mariska's patience snapped. There is nothing for you to take. Moira tilted her head. Because you already took it? Mariska's nostrils flared. Moira moved carefully, just enough to reach for her phone in her pocket, tapping the record button without looking. She had no idea if this would work, but Camille had warned her. Mariska was calculated, but she had a breaking point. Moira made her voice small, hesitant. Mariska, what happened to me? For a split second, there was no reaction. Then Mariska let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You really want to know? Moira didn't say anything. Mariska took a slow step closer, voice dropping into something almost conspiratorial. Vanessa was a spoiled brat. Entitled, reckless. Always thinking she was smarter than everyone else. Her lips curled. She thought she could take what wasn't hers. She thought she could outmaneuver me. Moira's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stay in character. I don't remember. Mariska cut her off, her voice turning sharp. You remember plenty. You were always playing the victim, always whining about your inheritance, about how unfair it was that I was in charge. She let out a quiet laugh, full of disdain. You were nothing but a child throwing a tantrum. Moira swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her phone. And you couldn't let me have it. Mariska's gaze flickered, a moment of something unreadable before she straightened her shoulders. You were never supposed to come back. The word sent a chill down Moira's spine. She had her. She had her on record. Mariska sighed, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from her sleeve, already regaining her composure. You should be grateful I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Her eyes darkened. Because if you don't, I will have you arrested for fraud. Moira's heart pounded. Fraud? Mariska smiled. Oh, come now. We both know you aren't Vanessa. And when I tell the police, they'll believe me. She leaned in slightly. Who do you think they'll side with? A criminal, or me? Moira held her ground, forcing her breath to stay steady. You think they'll believe you? Mariska's smirk didn't waver. I think they'll believe whoever speaks first. Moira's grip on her phone tightened. She didn't need to speak first. Because Mariska had already said everything she needed to. Moira practically sprinted to Camille's suite, her hands still shaking as she pressed play on her phone. The moment Mariska's voice filled the room, cold, sharp, damning, Camille closed her eyes and exhaled, a slow, satisfied sound. Well, she murmured, leaning back in her chair. That's that. Moira dropped onto the couch, pressing her hands to her face. You think this is enough? Camille smirked. Oh, sweetheart. She lifted her glass. It's more than enough. Within the hour, they were at the police station. Camille handled the conversation with the detectives, sliding the phone across the desk with the ease of someone who had been in this position before. She was calm, collected, perfectly poised as she explained, in crisp, carefully chosen words, that Moira had not committed fraud, that she had only stepped into the role because she had been led to believe there was something to uncover. The detective played the recording twice. Then a third time. Mariska's voice, smooth and lethal, filled the room. You were never supposed to come back. Moira clenched her fists in her lap, watching as the detective leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his chin. He exchanged a glance with his partner. We'll handle this, he said finally. Camille nodded, as if she had never expected anything else. Moira didn't breathe again until they were outside. Camille turned to her, eyes glinting. Now, she said, we wait. The wait wasn't long. The next morning, Mariska made good on her threat. She called the police, spinning a careful tale of fraud, of deception, of a woman pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had barely finished her rehearsed outrage before the officers on the other end of the call informed her that they already knew. That the woman she was accusing had already come forward. And that they were on their way to her estate. Mariska barely had time to react before the doorbell rang. The officers stood at the entrance, polite but firm. And this time, she was the one being arrested. Moira sat at her kitchen table, the glow of the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cheap laminate surface. Her phone buzzed again, vibrating against the wood, the same name flashing on the screen. Grant Whitaker. She had been expecting this call. Dreading it, really. He had been persistent, texting, leaving voicemails, always polite, always controlled, but undeniably insistent. Grant wasn't the type to let things go. And now that Mariska was gone, now that the truth had unraveled in the ugliest way possible, he was reaching for something to hold on to. Moira wasn't going to be that something. The phone rang again. She sighed and picked up. There was silence at first, a weighted pause, then his voice, steady, smooth. Moira. She didn't respond. I wasn't sure you'd answer. She leaned back in her chair, fingers tapping against the rim of her coffee mug. I shouldn't have. He chuckled softly, a sound that might have been charming under different circumstances. I suppose I deserve that. She didn't agree, but she didn't argue either. I wanted to thank you, he said after a beat. Moira raised an eyebrow. For what? For what you did. His voice dipped lower, softer, like he was speaking a truth he had barely admitted to himself. For uncovering the truth. For making sure justice was served. Justice. The word sat oddly between them. She didn't know what justice really meant in all of this. It didn't bring Vanessa back. It didn't undo the years of secrets, the pain, the manipulation. And it certainly didn't erase whatever guilt Grant carried. He exhaled, and she could hear the faint clink of glass in the background. I keep thinking, he continued, his tone shifting, about how much time we lost. Moira's fingers tightened around her mug. I know I didn't handle things well, he said. I know I was intense. But you have to understand, he stopped himself, sighing. I just don't want to lose you again. There it was. Moira closed her eyes, already knowing where this was going. The slow, careful phrasing. The way he let vulnerability slip in at just the right moment. This was how men like Grant operated. They weren't overtly dangerous, not in the obvious way. They were something more insidious. Possessive, but under the guise of devotion. Controlling, but with just enough charm to make it feel like love. She had seen the way he unraveled when he thought Vanessa had come back. The desperation. The need to claim her. And for a brief moment, she had wondered if he was capable of something worse. Now she saw him clearly. Grant wasn't a murderer. But he was the kind of man who believed that love meant ownership. She wasn't going to let herself be owned. She sat up, forcing a quiet breath before she spoke, keeping her voice gentle, careful. Grant, she murmured, I think we both know that's not a good idea. Silence. Then, a short, quiet laugh. You don't mean that. I do. His voice hardened, just slightly. Moira, I'm not asking for much. I just think we should take things slow. Start over. There it was. The bargaining stage. The final offer before frustration took over. She softened her tone, let her words settle like silk. You deserve someone who wants that too. Another pause. Longer this time. She could almost hear the shift, the way his grip on the conversation tightened, like he was trying to reel her back in. I see, he said finally. The warmth had cooled. Moira swallowed, keeping her posture relaxed, even as her pulse quickened. Thank you, he said, distant now. For everything. Then the line clicked dead. She let out a slow breath, staring at the phone in her hands. Grant was done with her. And for the first time since this entire thing began, she was finally free. The moving truck was smaller than Moira expected. It was strange, really, how a life could shrink down into a handful of boxes, stacked neatly in the back of a rented vehicle. She had moved before, too many times to count, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't running away. Tess sat on the curb, swinging her legs, humming some half-invented tune while clutching the last of their potted plants. A stubborn little fern, the only thing they had managed to keep alive through all their moves. Moira handed the movers a few extra bills, more than she should have, but enough to make them leave without questions. She didn't need anyone asking why she was here, why she had packed up her life so quickly, why she looked over her shoulder whenever she entered a room. She wasn't scared. Not anymore. But old habits died hard. She picked up the fern and nudged Tess gently. "Come on, kid. Let's see our new kingdom." The house was small, sitting at the end of a quiet street in a town barely big enough to be called a town at all. 2 bedrooms, a creaky porch, a kitchen with cabinets that didn't quite close all the way. The backyard had a leaning fence and an apple tree that looked like it hadn't borne fruit in years. It was nothing special. But it was safe. No more looking over her shoulder. No more rich people and their twisted games. No more secrets, no more carefully curated lies. She was done pretending. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old wood, the kind of scent that reminded her of visiting her grandmother as a child. Tess ran ahead, claiming the bedroom with the biggest window, while Moira stood in the doorway, letting the quiet settle around her. She had told herself that this was what she wanted. A small life. A quiet life. She would make it work. The first few weeks passed in a blur of unpacking, of adjusting, of learning where the closest grocery store was and which gas station had the cheapest coffee. She took a job at a local bookstore, the kind of place that didn't pay much but didn't expect much either. It was slow, predictable. No high society drama, no whispered threats behind closed doors. Just shelves of books and customers who actually said thank you. At night, after Tess had fallen asleep, she would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the hum of crickets and the occasional distant bark of a dog. Sometimes, her mind would wander. She would think about Camille, about the way she had calmly handled everything, as if exposing Mariska had been nothing more than a carefully planned chess move. She would think about Grant, about the way his voice had cooled in that last conversation. And, no matter how hard she tried not to, she would think about Vanessa. Because even now, even with Mariska behind bars, there was one question she had never been able to answer. Where had Vanessa gone? Then, one morning, the postcard arrived. Moira found it buried between a grocery store flyer and an electric bill, its edges slightly bent, the ink smudged just enough to suggest it had traveled a long way. There was no name. No return address. Just 5 words, written in careful, deliberate script. "You saved me. Thank you." Moira's breath caught. She turned the card over, searching for something, anything, that would tell her where it had come from. But there was nothing. The postmark was smudged beyond recognition. She read the message again, heart pounding. 5 words. That was all. But she knew. She knew exactly who had sent it. Vanessa was alive. Moira sank into one of the mismatched kitchen chairs, still gripping the postcard, her mind racing. Where was she? How had she found out what had happened? Had she always been watching? She thought back to the diary, to the words scrawled in desperate ink. Mariska will never let me be free. Had Vanessa escaped that night? Had she known Mariska was closing in and run before it was too late? Had she always planned on disappearing? Or had something gone wrong? Moira exhaled sharply, setting the card down on the table. She should have felt relief. After all, that had been the goal, hadn't it? To expose the truth, to bring Mariska down, to give Vanessa, wherever she was, a chance to breathe again. But instead, all she felt was unease. Because if Vanessa had been alive all this time, if she had been watching from a distance, then why hadn't she come forward? Why now? Tess came skipping into the room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. What's that? Moira turned the card over, tucking it under a pile of mail. Just a note from an old friend. Tess yawned, grabbing an apple from the counter. Are we going to the park today? Moira smiled, pushing the thoughts aside. Yeah, kiddo. Let me get my shoes. She let Tess run ahead, let the morning settle around her. Then, one last time, she looked at the postcard. 5 words. 5 words that told her, without a doubt, that this wasn't over.